everyone watching today, and welcome to this part of our series on creative activism. My name's Lucy and I'm part of the British Museum's Youth Collective, and I'm joined today, albeit virtually via Zoom, with Amina Atiq. Amina is a Yemeni Scouse poet, a performance artist, facilitator and activist. She's worked with media establishments such as the BBC and British Muslim TV, and is a 2019 BBC Words finalist, amongst her many other achievements. So we're very excited to be speaking to you today and discussing your work. So hi Amina, welcome, how are you?
Hi guys, yeah, I'm really well. Thank you for having me. It's probably not the best way, to communicate, but under these circumstances, I think we've done okay, haven't we? We've done well.
Definitely. This is just everyday life now, isn't it? Everything's over Zoom. How long have you been making work, and how did you get into spoken word poetry?
Oh, okay. So to go back to Yemen, so I was born in Yemen. I was mute till the age of 4 to 5, according to my mother. They thought I was just muted, certain disability or. When I did come to the UK, I started kind of like speaking my first words. Arabic was my first language. However, my mum said that I was a very strange child because obviously I couldn't talk and I had hearing problems. That I then became very observant, reflective. I said from the age of 6, I was already like, because my dad he's a reader. My dad reads a lot of books. I used to get his books and copy word to word. So I was really fascinated by language, and I think it's because I couldn't hear much from my right ear, and also because I was very slow in speaking. Obviously now I can speak for England. I do struggle sometimes with pronunciations of words and certain things. However, I think it's really important that I mention this part, even though it talks about disability, and I think this is a part of my work now because I like to make my art accessible in for those who have hard of hearing, especially because I know what it's like not to be to be excluded from groups because you've got a certain type of disability, and some disabilities are invisible. And but to go into like the midway where I kind of like went into that spoken word, I think that fascination for language was always part of me from a very young age. And when I got into school, I was already writing with orange highlighters, gel pens. I've got it in a box up here. Professionally, about 5 years ago, I joined a young writers group called With Writing on the Wall. And I think that's the first time I heard of spoken word. And that's when I kind of went into like YouTube, started looking into like deaf poetry and, loads of like, Kanye West I saw. And I was quite like surprised that spoken word was cool. Like I thought it was just certain types of people. And I think my first spoken word artist that I saw was Suleiman, and I think his poem was, if I can remember, I'm not danger, I am dangerous, I'm not angry, I am anger. And I was like, wow, I want to do something like that. Is it hit the way the audience just sat in silence and they were really captivated by his words. And since then, it has been the most exciting, emotional and overwhelming journey. And yeah, I would never change anything. I failed in so many things and I've achieved so many things. But I am literally just looking forward now to just publishing, to touring, to trying different elements of art forms from filming to editing. It doesn't stop at just poetry and spoken words. You become like, a multidisciplinary artist and everything. And yeah, so this has kind of been my life kind of journey. But the reason why I kind of went a different direction to that question, Lucy, is only because a lot of people think spoken word artists and poets is just poetry on poetry on page, sorry, or it's just where conscious words coming out of our mind. Being a poet is sharing your life journey as well, because everything follows a particular sequence. And that sequence was, at the age of 6, I was fascinated by language because I could not speak it. And I think now the fact that I can speak it and I can write it, I will use it. So yeah, and I think that, But yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. That was such an interesting response, actually. And off the back of that, actually, do you think there's something about the performative element of spoken word poetry that affects people in a different way than perhaps like just written poetry or prose?
The thing is with spoken word, people see it as this modern thing, but if we look at history, spoken word is just another thing that a lot of people used to do poetry orally. Like, you know, the first time I heard poetry was at a funeral or at a wedding, in an Arabic wedding. And it was oral, it wasn't page. So I feel like this whole like spoken word, it's always been there. People would, you know, recite poetry from the balconies in Yemen or in the mosques or in religious places for centuries. So it's not a new thing. It's just we're making it our own thing now. But there's something powerful about spoken word poetry, and I think as a Muslim woman and, you know, woman of colour and all these identities I'm really proud of, and obviously being Scouse, which people get quite shocked when I open my mouth. It's a really like a selling point because no one forgets you. They just remember that Muslim Scouse girl, like. And I think as a spoken word artist in a very competitive industry, I use that as an advantage. I make sure that I'm more Scouse than usual, and I recognize that it's because I'm proud of my identity. I should be able to celebrate it on stage. But I think the most important thing, as well as, you know, reciting poetry on stage, is is representation and visibility. Because I know there's so many other Muslim girls and women of colour who are probably watching at home or in actual theatre spaces, who might think, you know what, I can do that because because she can, and she is. So I
Wow.
think visibility and representation is
Yeah.
really important.
Well, just off the back of that, speaking about representation, I think often when we think of like British poets, we think of old white men with RP accents. And even though there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that and those people, um, how important do you think, as an artist and as who you are, that we keep diversifying the way we think of poetry and sort of welcoming different voices and genders and skin colours to the poetry scene today?
Poetry in very marginalised groups in our society is very celebrated. Like in the Somali community, poetry is very celebrated. You know, like I said, I heard poetry first at a wedding, not in school when I started studying, you know, male war poets. It was literally at a wedding at the age of probably 8. That's the first time I heard poetry properly and acknowledged that it was. And the thing is, there is a lot of like there is a lot of diverse poets. The issue is, I think, is that every different types of poets from different communities need different types of support in terms of outreach work. So this is why I believe, you know, someone who's already got their foot in the door, I need to make sure that I'm not just performing and creating work, but I'm also creating a platform so that they can see that that work is for them. So, and I say this, and I always say it, you know, I'm here to teach myself so I can teach others. I'm here to create work so I can give other people the platform to create their own work. And it's not about just giving and getting. It's also, you know, this idea of setting an example. People need role models, and some role models we need, you know. And when I joined the poetry scene, I did feel like a lonely little voice in the audience sometimes, or in on stage. But, you know, not everyone has that bravery and courage to be the first one to, you know, to break that barrier. And I recognize that and I celebrate that. But I also recognize that some people do need a push. And yeah, so I think that's just where I'm heading towards my career now. Is I'm still creating work, but I'm also now looking at how can I now teach what I know.
Mm, amazing. I think a lot of people really appreciate your presence in the poetry community as well. So
Yeah.
great work you're doing. A lot of work you're making is quite politically charged, and it does deal with some difficult topics. So I think it can be quite challenging to an audience. And I just wondered whether that was intentional. Like, are you purposefully using your art as a vehicle for social commentary almost?
Um, yes and no. First, yes, because this is where I began. I started writing poetry at the time of the Arab Spring. So obviously the Arab Spring had an impact on my work because I started questioning identity and what that means from a political perspective. So it's a responsibility, yes. I want my poetry to do something and to change something. I'm not writing poetry to entertain, and I think people need to understand that poetry is not just to entertain. We're not here, to make you escape your reality and take you to fairyland and rainbows and clouds. We're here to do something. We're here to educate. We are educators as well as poets. So, and the reason why I say no as well is because it's a lot of responsibility to deal with.
Mm.
You know, I'm also tackling Islamophobia in my work, racism, and then you've got the political and social, injustice against the Yemeni people in the Arab world, and then and I just think that's not my responsibility, and I want to write. So yeah, yes and no. When I feel like I can make an impact, I will hopefully continue writing about it. If I feel like my voice is not needed here, and people are here already doing that, then I'll take a step back.
Mm. Well, as you said, a lot of your work is about identity, your self-identity, and then the identity of your community. So I guess as an artist, how do you deal sometimes with any negative commentary or controversial opinions that you receive about your work, with it being so personal to you?
A lot of people don't realize poetry, our sword is our pen. We
Mm.
don't attack, we attack with our pen. So what it does, like, and I used to say this when we were in school, when we had, like, racist boys just layering, racist remarks at us. I remember saying to this young boy, I said, his name was Jack. I said, Jack, you're going to be one of my characters in my poems. And he did. He became a very vital character in my poem. He made my story become very authentic. And if Jack is listening, I just want to say thank you so much. Give me hate or love, it becomes part of my poetry.
To be able to turn something negative into a positive. Wow. So we're currently filming in October of 2020, the dreaded year. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. And part of that pandemic, we spent in lockdown. So we had a lot of time to just sit at home with our thoughts and feelings. And I wondered then, with that time, were you able to write more? Did you have time to think about writing more? And if so, did what you were writing about and the way that you write change?
I actually had more work. And I think it's because people were, there was a lot more funding, and obviously people were creating more work because there was more hours in the day because there was no traveling. However, what I did the first few months, I relearned my craft. Because it's been a long time I've revisited poetry as a form. I was constantly creating, but I thought, you know what, let me go back to the basics. Amina, where did you begin? And I actually took my box out that's on top of my cupboard, and I read my old poems, and that reminded me the young Amina who was strong, carefree, did not censor her words to please anyone else. And I said, this is what I need to go back to. And the reason why is because I wrote once in my poem, and which is published, and I regret writing. I don't regret it. I just think I learned so much from this line. And I wrote, I carried my suitcase on my back. Okay?
Mm.
The thing is, though, this is a Western perspective of what an immigrant looks like. And I kind of started writing for that audience, like in that voice.
Mm.
But I said, I didn't carry my suitcase. I came on a first class plane ticket to the UK. So why am I feeding into that Western perspective of what an immigrant looks like? No one carried the suitcase on their back, you know? And I realized what I was doing at that point, I was definitely not writing from within, from the truth. And I said, Amina, you need to write what is truthfully, not pleasing your readers and your audience. Because now my work has taken a 360 turn. And I've just finished a poem called When My Mother Danced With My Hair. And I can't believe I've never written about it. It's the most it's the poem that has made me, like, I can just see me in it and my mother. And the idea of this poem, just to give you a little brief about it, when me and my mother emigrated to the UK, my dad was born here, so he was already here at the time. My mother used to brush my hair every single day. She used to nurture it every single day. It was like a routine for an hour. She had a water on one side so she could put a hand in it, and then she had olive oil and some cream. And it was, my hair just smelled of olive oil every day going to school. She'd plait it perfectly into little two, and it was dead long up to, way behind my back. And I hated it. I hated it because I didn't look like everyone else. Everyone had, really fluffy hair, strawberry blonde, and I had black, thick hair that was just plaited all the time, and it stank. And I remember I never appreciated that, and now I appreciate it because what my mother was trying to do, she was trying to communicate with me. She was, because my mother comes from a village and I grew up in a city, so she was trying to communicate with me, with my hair, trying to say, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget that, this is part of how I grew up, because my mother also nurtured my hair in this way. And it got to the point where, like, 7 years later, when I was about, 14 or something, I cut it. She came into the room and I had the scissors in my hand and it was to a bob.
Wow.
I remember my mother just heartbroken. She didn't say a word. She just walked out the room. And the last line of the poem is, "We no longer dance, and my heart has not been quite well." And this is not just even about hair and my mother. This is about my relationship between me and my mother, which I've spoken before with BBC Bite Size about this idea of me and my mother's, generational gap, and how culturally we've been influenced differently has causes a bit of a clash sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I love my mother dearly, but I also acknowledge there's a lot of people who, there's mother and daughter relationships are quite complicated sometimes.
Definitely.
Yeah, so and finally, I got to write something that I really wanted to write about. And I feel really doing anything. I'm just letting people into my life a little bit, which feels a bit scary.
I think lockdown was definitely a period that a lot of people needed, though, to sort of reconnect with their roots and redefine what's important to them and the way they go about things. So would you actually be able to take us through the process that you go through when making a piece of work?
So this is one of the processes that I do, is sometimes as writers, we're told to find inspiration on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Thing is that we forget is that the inspiration is within our own homes. So what I do is objects and visual images, like pictures, something that is visual or something that I can touch, is kind of like the source of my inspiration. So my process has always been physical and visual. I don't just sit and write. I listen to conversations. I observe people, not in a not in a scary way, but I'm very aware of my environment. I can be sitting down in a crowd and I can literally capture everything that's going in. And I think this is really important for writers and poets to do that, is to get inspiration. Every day is a different day and every poem will be different. If I take a picture today, I will never, it's very less likely I will get the same picture ever again. It's a moment. And poetry is a moment. You need to capture it. Carry a notepad in, the back of your pocket and a pen. Because if something comes, don't miss that moment. Take it. Take that picture. Or write the first few words of it. So I'm a messy writer. I vomit on the page. I let everything come out from here, my heart. And I always say to myself, Amina, if you write your first poem, a new poem, if you don't feel any vibration from your heart, then it's not worthy of a poem. So I literally vomit until I find that line that literally strikes me from inside. I'm like, yes. Same with, when I dance with my, when my mother danced with my hair in her hands, that took me so long to get that line. And I was saying, Amina, what does that mean? you know, what is your mother doing? Is she communicating? I was like, no. And when I got the word dance, I was like, this is it. This is what it is. I wanted to make it subtle. I wanted to make it like we're actually in like a theatre space and she's dancing with my hair, you know. But when you go into it, it's more than that. It's neglect. It's heartbreak. It's problems. You can tell that this person in this poem has a lot of problems with their mother, and their mother has a lot of problems with their daughter. So yeah, so the process is get inspiration from within.
Awesome. So it does sound like you've been writing a lot. Do you have any new and exciting projects that you're working towards at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm finishing my commission for Southend Metal. They commissioned me to do a research piece on the Southern Manor in Southend, and I've started to write because it's this abandoned house, and we obviously, due to COVID, we're not able to visit it. But I said to myself, instead of writing about the house from a like, you know, because the poems are just going to turn into research pieces, I want to place myself inside the house, looking outside. So I've written a lot of poems about home again, abandonment, neglect. You know, how do you feel when the home that you yearn for no longer exists? You know, this idea of longing. So this has been an interesting little journey. And one of the things recently, I've been awarded a residence of Queensland Poetry Festival, which is based in Australia. So I'm really, really excited because first time I've had my poetry reach international waters.
Congratulations. Wow.
No, thank you. So I'm really excited. So I'll be producing some work with them and mentoring some of the young people. Yeah, so many things. Obviously, I'm part of, which I've got to mention, anti-racism focus group with Curious Minds. So even though it's not poetry related, I think it's really important to mention that the work for activism does not stop. You know, however, I'm not protesting or rallying or campaigning as much. I want to sit at the table. I want to make these choices and advise people what is the best way to go forward when we're engaging with types of communities that we don't relate to. And yeah, so I'm very honoured to obviously have had that position to become part of a focus group and to advise them on particular things.
Speaking about young people, what advice would you give to creative young people who want to use their talent to actually make a change in society and have their voices heard?
I would say the first one is find a mentor. And your mentor can be part of your local government, local community, sorry, or it can be someone from the local government if you have, but someone who's a mentor, someone who, you know that cares about you, and it can be a family member, but someone who really believes in the work that you do and the work that you want to create. That's the first thing. Second thing, find your community, your writing community. So there's a lot of groups that you can join, writing, even you can go into the theatre groups. They do a lot of writing as well. Find your own community because you want to feel like you belong with people, and this is the best way. And I think the third thing is no one, even writers and your peers, they will not believe in you unless you believe in you're a writer. I want you the next day to wake up in the morning and say, I am a writer. Because I think a lot of people are very apologetic about writing. Like, I think I write. No, you are a writer. You are a poet. I am. And get used to saying that because you are going to say a lot in your biography. I am this and I do this and I do that. And get used to it. And last and final is enjoy it. Have fun with it. And if you want to change something, remember that your pen is your sword. So if anyone attacks, you attack back with your work.
I think that's excellent advice, actually. And then with those words of wisdom, I think now would be a great time to invite you to deliver a short poetry set. So did you have some poems prepared that you could share with us now?
This is called Backbencher, and this poem is about my father in the 80s as a Liverpool fan, but also, you know, a Yemeni guy with black curly hair, brown eyes. You know, what does that look like in the 80s? So, Backbencher. I saw my father cry for the first time. He gave birth to this city to remind me home is sketched across his belly. The sirens did not stop yelling, he kept on running, and this will never be his game to play. And my father spat the city out of his mouth, chanting her anthem in his foreign tongue. The red flag is the only song he knew. And I saw my father cry for the first time. He scruffled his hands in the mud to find the secret between our borders is the difference between this city and men in suits who suck their thumbs and fiddle their fingers in our pockets. And young men like my father, black curly hair, brown eyes, mocha skin, curl their tongues in their political lingo. They sat on back benches and learnt to watch from a distance. And I saw my father cry for the first time. He cradled the city in his arms, waiting to be loved. But all he knew that this glory does not belong to people like him. And the red flag is the only song he knew. And when my father died of a heartbreak, he told me to never give up on this city, for no first love kills with a dagger. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Yeah, that was beautiful. And a lovely way to end this interview, I think. So to everyone watching, be sure to check out Amina on Twitter and Instagram at Amina Atiq Poet. And also don't forget that this is a 3-part series. So be sure to catch the other 2 parts in which we speak to a digital activist and an artist about their practice. This is also part of a wider series of events put on by the British Museum's Youth Collective. So be sure to check out our wider catalogue too. And thank you so much again, Amina, for speaking to us. Yeah, I really appreciate your time and quite literally your beautiful words. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and to a hopeful future.